I stared in disbelief as my entire world crumbled around me. The calculated betrayal would have destroyed most men, but I refused to become another casualty of manipulation and lies. My name is Dimitri Atkinson, and I'm 34 years old. Each morning I wake up in the house I bought before my marriage, make coffee in the kitchen I renovated, and plan my day with precision. When Belinda, my wife of 6 years, looked me in the eye and smirked that she needed a real man, our friends Mark and Jenna nodded as if I deserved it. My sister Lily was the only one who stood by me when everyone else chose sides. My jaw clenched as I recognized the coordinated effort to paint me as the villain in my own story. I won't be erased from my life, I promised myself. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. I should have known something was wrong the moment we walked into Mark and Jenna's living room. The air felt different, charged with unspoken words. Mark couldn't quite meet my eyes, and Jenna was being extra attentive, topping off my wine glass before it was even half empty. Our Friday night gatherings had been a tradition for years. Usually, we'd share work stories, debate which streaming shows were worth watching, and laugh about the stupid things we'd done in college. Normal stuff, comfortable stuff. Not tonight. We were gathered around the coffee table, takeout containers spread between us. Belinda had been quiet all evening, checking her phone and smiling at messages I couldn't see. I'd asked her twice if everything was okay. Both times, she'd answered with a curt, "Fine." I was mid-sentence about a project at work when Belinda suddenly sat forward, elbows on her knees, wine glass dangling between her fingers. "I messed up," she interrupted, her eyes flicking to mine like I was late to a meeting she'd scheduled. Then she dropped the bomb. I needed a real man. The room went still. Owen stopped chewing. Jenna's hand froze on her glass. Mark studied the floor like it contained ancient wisdom. "Define real," I said, keeping my voice even while my heart hammered against my ribs. Belinda's eyes narrowed. "Someone who isn't controlling about money," she fired back. "Someone who actually listens." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I'd grown up watching my parents struggle with debt. When Belinda and I got married, we'd agreed on financial boundaries, boundaries she'd repeatedly pushed. "I'm the one who paid off your credit cards. Twice," I reminded her, my voice tight but controlled. "Listening was all I did while you edited the story for our friends." Jenna jumped in before Belinda could respond. "Dimitri, don't attack. She's being vulnerable." Vulnerable? My wife had just admitted to cheating, and somehow I was the aggressor. Belinda crossed her legs and smiled. That smirk I'd later recognize in my nightmares. "His name is Chris. He makes me feel seen." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Chris Morton?" I asked, pieces clicking into horrible place. "Our neighbor. The guy who showed up for barbecues uninvited. The one who borrowed my drill 3 months ago and never returned it. The guy who borrows my tools and forgets to return them." Owen's palms went up like he was directing traffic. "Man, don't be petty. Don't be petty." I wanted to laugh. My marriage was imploding in front of our friends, and I was supposed to worry about sounding petty? "Petty is sleeping with a married woman and telling her I'm the problem," I said, heat pushing through my teeth, despite my best efforts to stay calm. Belinda shrugged, a casual dismissal of 6 years together. "You stopped being a husband. I needed a real man." I remember the moment clearly. The absolute clarity that washed over me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was Belinda's choice, planned and executed with precision, unveiled in front of an audience she'd prepared to take her side. "Then you can have him," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'll have my life back." I stood up. No yelling, no scenes. I just smiled, not with anger, but with the strange relief of finally seeing the truth. I took my keys from the side table, nodded once to the room, and walked out. Behind me, I heard Jenna's voice. Should someone go after him? Mark's response followed me into the night. Give him space. He needs to process. They were wrong. I didn't need space to process. I needed distance to plan. The cool evening air hit my face as I closed the door behind me. Stars glittered overhead, indifferent to the collapse of my world. I walked to my car, each step taking me further from the life I thought I had and closer to whatever would come next. I drove without destination at first, muscle memory guiding me through streets I'd traveled 1,000 times. The radio stayed off. I needed the silence. Remember those old movies where the betrayed husband trashes the house or gets blind drunk? That wasn't me. My anger ran cold, not hot. It sharpened my thoughts rather than blurring them. After 20 minutes of aimless driving, I found myself heading toward Lily's apartment on the north side of town. My little sister had always been my shelter in storms, even when we were kids. I called her from the car. "Hey, big brother," she answered, voice bright. "What's up? Can I crash at your place tonight?" I asked, the words sticky in my throat. A beat of silence. "Of course. Everything okay? I'll explain when I get there." The apartment complex was lit by yellowing security lights. Lily was waiting at her door when I pulled in, her auburn hair tied back, concern etched on her face. She took one look at me and opened her arms. "Belinda cheated," I said into her shoulder. Lily stiffened. "That absolute—" She cut herself off. "Come inside." Her apartment was small but warm. Potted plants in every corner, photos on the walls, a bookshelf crammed with paperbacks. The familiar smell of her lavender candles brought back summer evenings when we'd sit on our parents' porch, planning our futures with the certainty only kids can muster. "Take the couch," she said, grabbing extra blankets from the hall closet. "You need anything? Water? Beer? A shovel to bury a body?" I almost smiled. "A notebook?" Lily raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. She handed me a spiral-bound notebook with cartoon cats on the cover and a pen. "Start from the beginning." I told her everything. The dinner, the confession, our friends' reactions. Lily paced as I spoke, her face darkening with each detail. "They took her side?" she finally erupted. "After she admitted cheating? They've been her friends longer than mine," I said, though the betrayal still stung. "And she's probably been working on them for weeks." "So what now?" Lily asked, dropping onto the armchair across from me. I opened the notebook. "Now I protect myself." While Lily made us tea, I drafted a list in clean, precise lines. I'd built our financial foundation, brick by careful brick. I wasn't about to let it crumble because Belinda had decided I wasn't real enough. I spent the next 3 hours executing each item. I rerouted my direct deposit to my personal account. I logged into our banking app and froze the joint line of credit where I was the primary holder. I disabled Belinda's authorized user card on my primary credit account. I methodically screenshot every statement, every transaction, every balance. I pulled my credit report and saved it as a PDF. Finally, close to 2 a.m., I texted Sam from the legal department at work. "Need recommendation for divorce attorney. Urgent. Explain tomorrow." His response came almost immediately. "Nancy Ruiz. Best in town. Sending contact." The business card appeared in my messages a moment later. I saved the number, then finally set my phone down. Lily had fallen asleep in the armchair, a throw blanket pulled over her legs. I covered her properly, then stretched out on the couch, notebook on my chest. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the vibration of incoming texts. I ignored them all. Dawn filtered through the blinds when I finally gave up on rest. My phone screen showed the damage. 32 missed calls. Belinda. Mark. Even Chris. 15 voicemails. 27 text messages. None contained the word sorry. "Where are you? We need to talk." "You're being childish. You can't just walk out like that." "Answer your phone." I scrolled through them while the coffee maker gurgled in Lily's kitchen. The messages grew increasingly demanding as the night progressed. By morning, they'd taken on a threatening tone. Lily emerged from her room, hair tousled. "How many?" 32 calls, I answered, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Wow," she accepted the mug. "What are they saying?" "That I need to come home and fix this." "Fix what? Her affair?" I shrugged, the movement stiff with tension. Just as I took my first sip of coffee, my phone vibrated with an incoming message. A group text from Mark. "We're worried about Belinda's safety. Your control has been toxic for years. We'll give statements, if needed." I stared at the screen, coffee forgotten. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was a coordinated attack on my character, my home, my future. They weren't just covering for Belinda's affair. They were building a case against me. Lily read the message over my shoulder and swore. "They're actually trying to paint you as the bad guy? After what she did?" I set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. "Looks that way." The notebook lay open beside me, my neat list of actions now seeming inadequate against this new threat. I'd been preparing for a divorce. I hadn't been preparing for war. Nancy Ruiz's office sat on the third floor of a renovated brick building downtown. The waiting room had the quiet hum of expensive professionalism, leather chairs, abstract art, fresh flowers on the receptionist's desk. I'd dressed for battle in my best navy suit, the one Belinda once said made me look stuffy. "Mr. Atkinson?" The receptionist looked up. "Ms. Ruiz will see you now." Nancy stood as I entered, extending her hand across a desk that looked like it had witnessed 1,000 desperate conversations. She was shorter than I expected, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing and a firm handshake that conveyed immediate competence. "Dmitri," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "Sam speaks highly of you. Thank you for seeing me on short notice." She nodded once, uncapping a pen. "Tell me what happened, and don't edit for my benefit." I laid it out. The dinner, Belinda's confession about Chris, our friends closing ranks, the threatening texts. Nancy listened without interruption, only the occasional scratch of her pen against a yellow legal pad breaking the silence. When I finished, she set the pen down. "First, I need to be clear," she said. "Your friends are trying to construct a narrative where you're controlling and potentially dangerous. That changes our approach." My stomach tightened. "I've never—" "I believe you," she interrupted. "But belief isn't evidence. We need to document everything, establish firm boundaries, and keep all interactions professional." She tapped her legal pad. "We do this by the book. Evidence, boundaries, consequences." For the next hour, we built a case file. Nancy pulled up bank statements on her computer while I forwarded emails from my phone. We cataloged hotel charges on Belinda's card, Nancy noted, highlighting transactions. "Those dates match when I was traveling for work," I confirmed. She nodded. "Gym fob entries?" I pulled up the fitness app that tracked our memberships. She checked in at 9:15 p.m. on these nights. Our gym is 2 blocks from Morton's apartment. "Good." Nancy made another note. "And the call logs?" I scrolled through our phone plan records. Late-night calls to CM. Pretty consistent pattern for the last 3 months. Nancy looked up. "Everything gets time-stamped. Everything gets documented." We pulled copies of the home title, purchased before our marriage, deed in my name, and bank records showing I'd made every payment. Nancy explained that while Washington was a community property state, the house had strong protection as separate property given the pre-marriage purchase and sole title. "What about today?" I asked. "She's still in our house. Today, you go home while she's at work. Take only what's undisputedly yours. Personal keepsakes, important documents. Leave a written notice about future communication." Nancy slid a template across the desk. "No scenes, no confrontations. Text me when you're in and when you're out." The afternoon sun was high when I pulled into the driveway of the home I'd bought 5 years ago. Before Belinda became my wife, I sat in the car for a moment, steeling myself. The house looked exactly the same. White trim, blue door, the rose bush I'd planted last spring. But nothing about it felt like mine anymore. Inside, I moved with purpose. I packed my keepsakes, my grandfather's watch, photo albums from before Belinda, the signed baseball my father gave me when I graduated college. I collected Maisie's vet records from the filing cabinet and the warranties and property titles from the fireproof box in the closet. In the kitchen, Belinda had left breakfast dishes in the sink. The coffee mug I'd bought her last Christmas, world's best wife, sat on the counter, lipstick staining its rim. I placed Nancy's printed note beside it. We'll discuss property and next steps with counsel present. Please don't contact me directly. I added the law firm's contact information, then stepped back, taking one last look around the space we'd shared. As promised, I texted Nancy when I left. In and out. No contact. Note left as instructed. Back at Lily's apartment that evening, I unpacked my small collection of possessions, the material remains of a life interrupted. Lily helped me organize the documents Nancy had requested for our next meeting. How was it? She asked. Being back there? Strange, I admitted, like walking through a museum of my own life. My phone buzzed. Belinda's name appeared on the screen, with a text that made my jaw tighten. We need to have a family meeting. My parents' house. Tomorrow at 6. Don't bring your sister. This is between us and my family. I showed Lily the message. You're not going alone, she said immediately. I thought of Nancy's advice. Evidence, boundaries, consequences. No, I agreed. I'm not going alone. Belinda's parents lived in a neat colonial with white columns and a garden that won neighborhood awards. I'd spent countless Sunday dinners in their dining room, listening to Theodore's business stories, while Elaine refilled wine glasses and Belinda squeezed my knee under the table. The familiarity made tonight's purpose even more surreal. Nancy and Lily flanked me as we walked up the brick path. Remember, Nancy whispered, let her talk first. Respond only to facts, not emotions. Theodore answered the door with a stiff handshake, his eyes sliding past mine. Everyone's inside. The dining room smelled like lemon polish and tension. Elaine stood behind her chair, fingers tight around the wooden back. Dimitri, she said, her voice a careful neutral. You brought friends. Legal counsel, I corrected, gesturing to Nancy. And family support. Lily nodded beside me. Belinda sat already, wearing the cream blouse she saved for important meetings. Her hands were folded neatly on the polished mahogany, wedding ring catching the chandelier light. Her expression was practiced, concerned but composed, with just enough moisture in her eyes to suggest restraint. Let's all sit down, Theodore suggested, clearly uncomfortable. We arranged ourselves like opposing armies, Belinda, Elaine, and Theodore on one side, Nancy, Lily, and me on the other. The table between us might as well have been a mile wide. I wanted this to be private, Belinda began, her voice soft but steady. Just family. Nancy is here to ensure clarity, I replied. And Lily is my family. Belinda's eyes narrowed slightly before she recalibrated. Mom, Dad, she turned toward her parents. I need to explain what's been happening. She teared up on cue. I'd seen this performance before. At restaurant anniversaries, when the free dessert didn't materialize. At parties when attention drifted from her stories. He controlled everything, she said, voice trembling perfectly. Our finances, our social calendar, even what I could buy. I felt suffocated. Elaine reached for her daughter's hand. Theodore studied his water glass. When I met Chris, it wasn't about that. He just listened. He made me feel valued. Her voice hitched. Dimitri had emotionally abandoned me long before anything happened. Nancy's pen tapped once on her yellow legal pad. The sound cut through Belinda's performance like a knife. We'll enter Exhibit A, Nancy said calmly. I reached into the leather portfolio I'd brought and removed a manila folder. My hands were steady as I laid out the first document. Hotel folios with Belinda's signature, dates circled in red. "These are nights you told me you were visiting your parents," I said, sliding the papers toward Theodore and Elaine. "May 15th, June 2nd, June 23rd. Elaine's hand twitched toward the papers, then withdrew. Next came the rideshare receipts, time-stamped and highlighted. Drop-offs 2 blocks from Chris Morton's apartment, return trips at 2 a.m. Theodore's eyes remained fixed on the wood grain, following some invisible pattern only he could see. The final evidence was the hardest to share, not because it hurt me anymore, but because it would hurt the people across from me. I placed the printout of a photo pulled from Belinda's linked cloud album. Belinda and Chris, his arm around her waist, her smile brighter than any I'd seen in months. The caption underneath, "He finally makes me feel alive." Elaine's shoulders dropped. Theodore's jaw tightened. Belinda went colorless. "That's," she started. "From your cloud account," I finished. "The one linked to our family plan that I pay for." The silence stretched between us, broken only by the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I remembered Theodore winding that clock every Sunday before dinner, explaining its mechanism to me while Belinda and Elaine prepared dessert. "I'm filing tomorrow," I said, my voice level. "I'm requesting exclusive use of the residence pending the divorce, given the title and circumstances." "You can't just—" Belinda started. "The house is in my name," I interrupted. "Purchased before our marriage. All payments made from my separate account." "Washington is a community property state," she countered, her lawyer's coaching evident. Nancy spoke for the first time. "True, but separate property remains separate when maintained as such. The home qualifies." I looked directly at Belinda. "You will collect your things under supervision." A tear slid down her cheek, but the performance had lost its power. In the reflection of her parents' silence, she must have finally heard how hollow her story sounded. "We should discuss this privately," she tried again. "No," I said simply. "We're past that point." Elaine sighed heavily, her hand dropping from Belinda's. Theodore finally looked up, but not at his daughter. At me. I saw something like resignation in his eyes. "The filing will happen tomorrow," Nancy confirmed, closing her notebook. "The hearing for temporary orders should be scheduled within 2 weeks." As we stood to leave, Belinda remained seated, tears falling silently now. Not for me, I realized, but for the audience that had finally stopped applauding. The courtroom's wooden benches felt harder than they looked. Nancy sat beside me, her posture perfect, while I kept my eyes forward. The judge, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a chain, reviewed our filings with methodical attention. "Your Honor," Belinda's attorney began, "my client has legitimate concerns about Mr. Atkinson's controlling behavior throughout their marriage. She's requesting temporary possession of the marital home as she rebuilds her life." I felt my jaw tighten but kept my face neutral. Nancy had coached me well. "Let your evidence speak. Your reactions won't help." The judge looked up. "And the property deed?" "While the deed may be in Mr. Atkinson's name, they've lived there as a married couple for years. Mrs. Atkinson has established it as her residence and requires stability during this difficult transition." Nancy stood, her movements unhurried. "Your Honor, the property was purchased by my client 3 years before the marriage. All mortgage payments have come from his separate account, carefully maintained apart from joint finances. Additionally, the grounds for this divorce include documented infidelity by Mrs. Atkinson." The judge nodded. "I have the evidence packet. Let's review." I watched the judge flip through our materials. The property deed with my name alone, bank statements showing the separate mortgage payments, and the carefully organized evidence of Belinda's affair. Each page turn felt like one step closer to something solid beneath my feet. "Mrs. Atkinson," the judge addressed Belinda directly, Your attorney's argument for stability would carry more weight if the circumstances were different. Belinda's eyes glistened, the same performance from yesterday. Given the separate property status of the home and the documented circumstances leading to this filing, I'm granting temporary exclusive occupancy to Mr. Atkinson pending final property division. I heard Belinda's sharp intake of breath. Her attorney whispered something to her, but she shook her head. The court will revisit all property matters at the final hearing. Are there any questions? The judge looked between both tables. No, Your Honor, Nancy replied. No, Your Honor, Belinda's attorney echoed. We're adjourned. Outside the courthouse, I took my first deep breath in what felt like days. The spring air smelled clean, like possibility. This is just the beginning, Nancy cautioned as we walked down the steps. But it's a good beginning. Thank you, I said, meaning it. What happens next? Belinda has 48 hours to remove essential personal items from the home. I've arranged for a sheriff's deputy to be present during that time. You should stay with your sister until that's complete. I nodded. And after that? After that, you go home, Nancy said with a small smile, and we continue building our case. Back at Lily's apartment, I opened the door to find her waiting with 2 beers. How'd it go? She asked. I got the house, I said, accepting the cold bottle. Temporary orders, but it's something. That's not something, Lily corrected. That's everything. She thought she could just walk away with your home. We clinked bottles, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the victory. That feeling lasted exactly 4 hours. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding the other night. We all want what's best for both of you. Belinda's hurting too, you know. I set the phone down without responding. 10 minutes later, Tasha's message appeared. Nobody's perfect, Dimitri. Sometimes people just need forgiveness to move forward. Owen's silence spoke volumes. He was choosing the path of least resistance, staying out of it entirely. Then came the message I hadn't expected. We should talk, Chris. I stared at those 4 words from the man who had borrowed my drill, sat at my dinner table, and slept with my wife. What could he possibly have to say? I deleted the message without replying. Night had fallen by the time I finished helping Lily with dinner dishes. The knock at the door was firm, official. Were you expecting someone? Lily asked. I shook my head and moved to answer it. 2 police officers stood in the hallway. One held a clipboard, the other stood slightly behind, hand resting near his belt. Dimitri Atkinson, the first officer asked. Yes, that's me. We're here to serve you with an emergency protective order. He handed me a folded set of papers. Mrs. Belinda Atkinson has filed a statement claiming you threatened her this afternoon. My mind raced through the day. Courtroom, lunch with Nancy, afternoon at Lily's, dinner. I hadn't been within miles of Belinda. This says I can't return to my house, I said, scanning the document. The house I was just granted occupancy of this morning. The emergency order supersedes other court orders until a hearing can be held, the officer explained, his voice neutral. You'll need to stay away from the residence and have no contact with Mrs. Atkinson. But I wasn't anywhere near her today, I said, feeling my world tilt sideways again. I was right here. You'll have opportunity to present that at the hearing, he replied. The date's on the second page. As they turned to leave, I stood in the doorway, the papers cold in my hand, my face a mask of stunned disbelief. I checked into the East Side Motel at 11:42 p.m. with nothing but my laptop bag and a change of clothes Lily had packed for me. The front desk clerk barely looked up as she slid the plastic keycard across the counter. Room 118. Checkouts at 11. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and cigarettes that had seeped into the walls years ago. I dropped my bag on the desk chair and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the protective order papers. The alleged threat supposedly happened at 3:15 p.m. I'd been watching the Mariners game with Lily, cursing their bullpen and eating microwave popcorn. Belinda knew I was a baseball fan. She'd complained about it often enough. She'd timed her lie well. I laid back on the scratchy comforter, eyes fixed on the popcorn ceiling. Sleep wasn't coming. My mind kept replaying that smirk at Mark and Jenna's, the casual way she'd said, "I needed a real man." And now this, a calculated move to take the house after the judge's ruling went against her. My phone buzzed with a text from Nancy. "Don't contact Belinda. Don't return to the house. Meet me at my office, 7 a.m. Bring your phone and any evidence of your whereabouts today. We'll fix this." I typed back. "I have doorbell footage, work badge logs, Lily's testimony." Her response came quickly. "Perfect. Get some rest." Rest? Right. The digital clock blinked 1:17 a.m. as I stared at the ceiling, anger burning like acid in my chest. Not just at Belinda, but at a system that lets someone weaponize false claims so easily. I must have finally drifted off around 3 a.m., because the next thing I knew, my alarm was blaring at 6. The shower sputtered lukewarm water as I tried to wash away the night. I put on yesterday's clothes, feeling grimy despite the shower, and drove to Nancy's office. She was already at her desk, 2 coffee cups waiting. Her face was calm, collected, the face of someone who'd seen this before. "This happens more than you'd think," she said, pushing a coffee toward me. "Losing party files, retaliatory claims. It's desperate, and it's going to backfire." I pulled out my phone and laptop. "I've got the doorbell camera footage showing I never came to the house yesterday. I've got my work badge scans from the parking garage at 9 a.m. and leaving at 12:30 to meet you. And I've got Lily's living room camera showing us watching the game at exactly 3:15. Nancy's eyebrows rose slightly. "Living room camera?" "Lily had a break-in last year. She installed indoor cameras that activate when she's not home or when the front door opens." "That's," Nancy smiled, "that's exactly what we need." We spent the next hour downloading footage, organizing timestamps, and preparing for the emergency hearing scheduled for 9 a.m. The courtroom was smaller this time, more intimate. Belinda sat with her attorney, her face composed in practiced distress. She'd even worn a high-necked blouse, a nice touch to imply fear. The judge reviewed the petition first, then looked at us. "Respondent's counsel?" Nancy stood. "Your Honor, we're prepared to prove that Mr. Atkinson was nowhere near Mrs. Atkinson at the time alleged, and, in fact, was watching a baseball game with his sister, documented by security footage." Belinda's mask slipped for just a second, a flicker of surprise. The judge nodded. "Proceed." Nancy methodically entered each piece of evidence. My work badge logs, the doorbell camera showing no activity at the house, and finally, the living room footage with a clearly visible timestamp showing me and Lily cheering a home run at exactly 3:17 p.m. "Mrs. Atkinson," the judge said, turning to Belinda, "your petition states that Mr. Atkinson confronted you at your workplace parking lot at 3:15 p.m. yesterday. This evidence contradicts that claim." Belinda shifted in her seat. "He could have come later. Maybe I got the time wrong." Nancy stood again. "Your Honor, we have continuous footage until 6 p.m., when Mr. Atkinson and his sister began preparing dinner, also documented." The judge reviewed the evidence again, then removed her glasses. "The petition for protective order is dissolved, effective immediately. Mrs. Atkinson, making false statements to this court is a serious matter. Consider this a warning." I didn't look at Belinda as we left. I didn't need to. The silence from her side of the courtroom told me everything. In the car, I sat with my hands on the wheel, not starting the engine. "You can go home now," Nancy said quietly. "Yes." I nodded. "But this isn't over." I drove back to my house in silence, the streets familiar yet somehow different. The house looked exactly as I'd left it, but it didn't feel like victory yet. Not while Belinda and the others were still spinning narratives and spreading lies. That evening, I picked up my phone and called Mark. Dmitri? He sounded surprised. Look, man, I want to talk. I cut him off. One conversation to end all of them. Your place, tomorrow night. Everyone present. Everyone? He asked cautiously. You, Jenna, Owen, Tasha, Belinda, and Chris, I said. And I'll bring Lily. What's this about? Clarity, I answered. You think you want to help Belinda? Fine. Then be there. Or I start having individual conversations that none of you will enjoy. A pause. Okay. 8 o'clock. I hung up and walked to my home office. Opening my laptop, I began printing everything I'd gathered. Text messages, bank statements, emails, and photos. I sorted them into labeled folders, one for each person who'd betrayed me. Setting the stack on my desk, I whispered, "This ends tomorrow." I arrived at Mark and Jenna's house at exactly 8, with Lily at my side. The street was quiet, the same street where, just weeks ago, my life had detonated. I'd parked in the same spot, same house, same people. But nothing else was the same, and nothing would be after tonight. You ready? Lily asked, squeezing my arm. I nodded. More than ready. Mark opened the door before we knocked. His eyes flicked nervously between us. Everyone's here, he said, stepping aside. The living room looked smaller somehow. Belinda sat on the same couch where she'd smirked and said she needed a real man. Chris perched uncomfortably on a dining chair that had been dragged in, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Owen leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Tasha sat beside Belinda, her hand occasionally patting my soon-to-be ex-wife's knee. Jenna had positioned herself in the armchair, legs crossed, looking like she was moderating a talk show. I didn't sit. I placed a leather folder on the coffee table and stood beside it. Thanks for coming, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Let's just get this over with, Belinda sighed dramatically. We don't need more drama. I almost laughed. The woman who'd created a hurricane of lies was tired of drama. I'm not here for closure, I said, looking at each face in turn. I'm here for clarity. I opened the folder and pulled out the first stack of papers. Mark, I said, handing him printed screenshots. These are the texts you sent promising to help Belinda be safe, while simultaneously forwarding my financial details to her. Mark's face flushed as he looked down at the evidence. Jenna leaned over to see, her expression freezing. You said that was confidential, she whispered to him. I continued without pause. Jenna, these are your messages, coaching Belinda on how to cry convincingly during mediation. Quote, remember to breathe shallow and blink a lot before the tears. Makes it look more natural. Jenna's mouth opened, then closed. She took the papers without meeting my eyes. Owen shifted uncomfortably. Man, I don't think… You're right, Owen. You didn't think. I cut him off. But at least you just stayed silent instead of actively sabotaging me. I turned to Chris next, pulling out another set of papers. Chris, these are your messages to your buddy Randy about Belinda. You sent these exactly 12 minutes after leaving her at the Courtyard Marriott on the 17th. I didn't read them aloud, but everyone could see the highlighted sections as I handed them over. So needy. Won't stop texting. Easy lay, but way too much drama. Chris's face went pale. He glanced at Belinda, who was staring at the papers in his hands. What? She whispered. Chris fumbled with the papers. These are private. So was my marriage, I replied evenly. Tasha cleared her throat. Dmitri, don't you think this is a bit… You're next, Tasha, I said, pulling out more papers. These are the lies you spread at your book club about my anger issues. Interesting, since you've never once seen me angry. I placed her stack on the table and let her reach for it herself. Belinda folded her arms across her chest. This is petty. No, I said, looking directly at her. This is evidence, and this is the last time I'll speak to you outside of a conference room. I felt Lily's supportive presence beside me as I continued. I've documented every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal. Nancy has it all. The divorce proceedings will reflect every bit of this reality, not the fiction you've been selling." Chris suddenly looked up, panic in his eyes. "You can't show that to Emily." I met his gaze without flinching. "I already did," I said calmly, face to face. She deserved a husband who respects her, not a man who steals tools and wives. Chris dropped his head into his hand, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Belinda's smirk, the one that had haunted me for weeks, finally vanished. In its place was something I'd never seen before on her face, the look of someone who'd just realized they'd lost everything they thought they controlled. The morning after the confrontation, I met Nancy at her office. She had a stack of papers waiting and a cup of coffee that tasted better than anything I'd had in weeks. Maybe it was just that I was finally seeing daylight. "You did good last night," she said, sliding a document across her desk. "Now we file the amended complaint, citing adultery." "Will it make a difference?" I asked. Nancy's eyes narrowed with purpose. "In this state, absolutely. We're requesting denial of spousal support based on marital misconduct, and we're asking for her to cover a portion of your legal fees." I signed where she pointed. Each signature felt like another brick in the wall between my old life and whatever came next. "The mediator's expecting us at 10, Nancy said, checking her watch. "Belinda's attorney requested one more attempt before the judge gets involved. She thinks I'll cave." Nancy's mouth quirked up. "She doesn't know you very well." I almost laughed. Neither did my wife. The conference room at the mediator's office had that intentional blandness of spaces designed for conflict. Beige walls, fake plants, a water pitcher no one would touch. Belinda sat across from me, wearing a cream-colored blouse that reminded me of our second anniversary dinner. Back then, I thought the softness in her eyes was love. The mediator, a silver-haired woman with reading glasses on a chain, introduced herself and explained the process. I barely heard the word. I was watching Belinda's hands fidget with her pen. When it was Belinda's turn to speak, she leaned forward. The tears came on cue, just like Jenna had coached her. "I made a mistake," she said, voice wavering perfectly. "But Dmitri emotionally abandoned me years ago. He was physically present, but never there. Always working, always worried about money." I felt my jaw tighten but said nothing. "I just needed connection," she continued. "If he had given me even a fraction of his attention." Nancy tapped her pen once against her legal pad. "Our signal." "My client rejects this characterization," Nancy said calmly. "And we have documentation." With deliberate slowness, Nancy slid our evidence folder across the table. The mediator opened it, flipping through the hotel receipts, the text messages between Belinda and Chris going back 18 months, the credit card statements showing jewelry purchases with my money that never made it to Belinda's jewelry box. The mediator's expression remained neutral, but her eyes lingered on certain pages. She looked up at Belinda, then back down at a particular document. "Ms. Atkinson," the mediator said, "these messages indicate the relationship began well before any period you've characterized as emotional abandonment." Belinda's attorney whispered something in her ear. She straightened her shoulders. "I was lonely," Belinda insisted. "While vacationing in Cabo on my bonus," I finally said, keeping my voice even. "While I worked overtime to pay off your credit cards. While I renovated the kitchen you wanted." The mediator held up a hand. "Let's focus on resolution." For the next hour, we worked through the agreement. The house would remain in my possession. That was non-negotiable. Maisie would stay with me. Our joint accounts would be divided, but Belinda would receive no spousal support, and she would contribute 20% toward my legal fees. When the final document was prepared, Belinda's hand shook as she signed. I noticed she'd removed her wedding ring. I'd taken mine off the night of her confession. "Is that it?" she asked when the pen left the paper. "That's it," the mediator confirmed. Outside in the parking lot, Nancy squeezed my arm. "Go home, Dmitri. The real home. Yours." That night, I unlocked the front door to the house I'd fought to keep. Maisie's nails clicked across the hardwood as she explored, sniffing corners as if checking that everything was still in place. I moved through the rooms, touching door frames, countertops, the back of the couch. Everything felt both familiar and new. I changed the sheets on the bed, our bed, now just mine, and slept without dreams for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I made coffee and carried it to the kitchen window. The backyard needed attention. The grass had grown long, and weeds were pushing up through the garden beds. Projects for another day. Maisie settled at my feet with a contented sigh. I looked down at her and felt something unlock in my chest. "Just us now, girl," I said quietly. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not empty, peaceful, like the silence after a storm passes, when you finally realize you're still standing. Life fell into a new pattern after the divorce papers were signed. Not perfect, not instantly healed, but steady and mine. The first Saturday after everything was finalized, I woke up early and stood in my backyard with a cup of coffee, staring at the broken fence panel that had bothered me for months. Chris had borrowed my power drill to fix it next weekend, nearly a year ago. That drill disappeared like so many other tools I'd lent him, along with my trust. So I bought a new one, a better one, and spent the morning replacing warped boards and driving screws with satisfying precision. My neighbor Carl wandered over, work gloves already on. "Need a hand?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before picking up a board. Carl had kept his distance during the worst of it, but he'd left a six-pack of beer on my porch the day I moved back in with a note that just said, "Welcome home." Some people understand that talking isn't always the point. "Thanks," I said, and we worked in comfortable silence, measuring twice, cutting once. By noon, the fence stood straight and solid. Carl and I clinked beer bottles in the shade. "Looks good," he said, nodding at our work. "Feels better," I replied. The days that followed had a rhythm that was entirely my own. I took Maisie for long walks at dawn, when the neighborhood was still waking up. She trotted beside me with her tail high, stopping to investigate interesting smells, while I let my mind wander freely. Sometimes I thought about nothing at all, and that was its own kind of victory. Weekends belonged to me again. Lily came over for dinner every other Sunday, bringing dessert and stories from her job. We'd sit on the back patio with Maisie between us, laughing at old family memories that predated Belinda completely. Those evenings reminded me that my life had solid foundations that existed before the betrayal and would continue long after. News traveled, as it always does in overlapping social circles. Emily, Chris's wife, called me once after she'd packed his things and changed the locks. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice clear and controlled, "for showing me the truth. It hurt, but not knowing would have been worse." I learned that Chris had moved into a month-to-month rental across town. His company's HR department had reviewed the policy violations. Apparently sleeping with a client's wife while on company time crossed several lines, and he lost the promotion he'd been bragging about. Sometimes consequences arrive through ordinary channels. Mark and Jenna's perfect couple facade developed visible cracks. Carl mentioned seeing them arguing in their driveway one evening, Jenna gesturing wildly while Mark stared at the ground. Trust doesn't survive in the shadow of secrets. They still hosted dinner parties, I heard, but the guest list had shrunk considerably. Owen texted sometimes, cautious messages that skated around what happened. "Hey man, how's work?" Or, "Saw that game last night?" I answered briefly, but honestly. We weren't friends anymore, not really. And he knew why. Some bridges don't get rebuilt. Tasha sent one final message that began with, "If I hurt you," and ended with radio silence after I didn't respond. Non-apologies deserve no acknowledgement. And Belinda? She found a small apartment across town. I only know because we had to exchange tax documents once, and her return address was on the envelope. She drives the older car now, the one she used to tease me about keeping past its prime. I heard through Lily that Belinda tried dating again quickly, but had trouble explaining her situation to new men. The truth has a way of following you. We crossed paths once at the courthouse when I was there finalizing some paperwork. She was wearing a blue dress I didn't recognize, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger and somehow smaller. She spotted me and tried to catch my eye, her face arranging itself into something between regret and hope. I looked through her, not with anger or hatred, but with the calm detachment you might feel toward a stranger on a bus. There was nothing left to say or feel, just a clean, locked door between then and now. If you're sitting where I once sat, with betrayal burning a hole in your chest and people telling you to swallow the pain for someone else's comfort, remember this: you don't need to shout to end a lie. You don't need revenge or grand gestures. You only need to choose the truth, stand in it firmly, and watch as those who built their lives on deception eventually crumble under the weight of reality. Tonight, I'll lock my front door, check on Maisie sleeping in her bed, and rest in a home that is fully mine again. Not because I won some battle, but because I refused to lose myself when the fight came to my door. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.